You know, part of my journey and the whole point of the metaphysic that I've laid out and what I call our best guesses as to what the heck's going on here, because nobody really knows. But, you know, it all gets down to this spiritual question of looking for the holy, for the sacred. How do I put myself in a context of meaning that allows me to be the best me? And really, it comes down to, where's the center of the world? Where's my center? You got to start somewhere, right? And what have human beings gathered around since recorded history? Well, it's interesting because the word that has been dubbed that is Axis Mundi. It's this connection between heaven and earth and hell. And just about, you know, in Japan, it's Mount Fuji is their Axis Mundi. Mount Zion for the Hebrews. Mount Olympus for the Greeks. The Black Hills for the Oglala peoples. Hindus built their temples on up high. And they even saw that the chakras was part of this. For Islam, it's Mecca. You see, the world tree, the Norse and Tolkien, the Norse whole understanding of the world tree and Tolkien have a lot to say about each other. Because what there are is three worlds. There's the middle world where we live, there's the heaven world, and then there's the underworld. If you look at the word China and you look at the literal meaning of it, it means Middle Kingdom. The whole thing is based on this kind of understanding. And it's only human beings in consciousness that have this understanding of a center. And it has to do, of course, with consciousness. Let's face it, you know, we're trying to orient ourselves. And it's important to understand what orientation really means. Because there are 7 directions. There's north, east, south, west, above, below, and within. And orienting ourselves, centering ourselves, putting ourselves on a path to this connection. Priests, shamans, philosophers, psychologists, people sitting around the water cooler, people having conversations. I'm going to suggest something. And I think the Hindus were close when they talked about their chakras. Today, there's nowhere we need go. There's nowhere we need go to find this center place. Because if we can't find it here within, then it won't exist. So I want to talk a little bit about the path to this center place. If the self is the Axis Mundi, then what are the guideposts? The guideposts on this path. Now there's the universal one of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and it's there in every religion. Every gathering of people around a center has included that. But once we put the self in the center, and once we see that, and I'm not saying we should be self-centered, but the self needs to be centered in order to understand it, our dharma, what we're here for, what our purpose is, and that's not something we can usually say. So what are the guideposts for this path that we might move more fully and participate more fully in this holy junction that connects us to the world, that allows us to understand ourselves as sacred and in a life-giving way? Now, as I said, I think the chakras, many of the psychological models are attempts to do so. If you're a Jungian or study Joseph Campbell, you get that piece easy. What are the guideposts that can connect us in healthy ways to a wholeness, to well-being, and to the fullness of a wholehearted living? I have to say I'm biased because it seems to me we've got to reduce this in some way that allows us to understand without getting caught in the esoterics of psychological stuff. And I'm going to say Brene Brown does it for me. If you haven't found her yet, please check out Gifts of Imperfection first, and your journey will continue from there. But I'm going to lay out these 10 guideposts for wholehearted living. I'll do it very quickly. One is cultivating authenticity and letting go of what other people think. Cultivating self-compassion, letting go of perfectionism. Cultivating a resilient spirit and letting go of numbing and powerlessness. Culminating gratitude and joy and letting go of scarcity and fear of the dark. Cultivating intuition and trusting faith, letting go of the need for certainty. Cultivating creativity, letting go of comparison. Cultivating play and rest, letting go of exhaustion as a status symbol and productivity as self-worth. Cultivating calm and stillness, at the same time letting go of anxiety as a lifestyle. Cultivating meaningful work and letting go of self-doubt and supposed to. Cultivating laughter, song, and dance, letting go of cool and always being in control. So these guideposts, these 10 guideposts, and go online, look up 10 guideposts for wholehearted living by Brene Brown. Seriously, she is worth getting into your soul. But I want to see you, and the whole point of this podcast is not just for you, but for me, to see our place in the universe in such a way that it makes a sacred center of meaning. And I think the concept of Axis Mundi is a good one. Things that are alive do have a center, and consciousness has created, there's nowhere we need go. This is it. We're the only ones that have this place. So I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to ask Marianne first. Marianne's coming to us from Spokane Valley in Washington State. Bob is coming to us from Florida. I'm coming from the south side of Spokane in Washington. And Marianne, Axis Mundi and the guidepost for access.
Oh, that's, as you're talking about Axis Mundi, I was raised Catholic in the Christian tradition. And what I thought of there was, that's the role, the function of the Holy Spirit, to where that's that connector piece. And if we believe that Spirit lives within us, then yes, that's where we have to go. We have to go inside to find that our connection, to find our center. And the guideposts, these things that you laid out from Brene Brown, and she's one of my favorites as well. The Gifts of Imperfection changed my life. That was a pivotal book for me when I read that a few years ago. But I think that if we can understand that we can cultivate these things, we can cultivate authenticity, we can cultivate resilience, we can cultivate gratitude, and it's a choice. It's totally, but I'm going to paraphrase it. Let's put it that way. I became smart and I set out to change the world. I became wise and I set out to change myself. And I think that's what we've been talking about, is how do we change ourselves? How do we bring ourselves to this place of connection? And I think these guideposts that you laid out bring us to that center, bring us to that place where we can connect with something greater than ourselves.
Amen. Bob, what say you?
Well, as a psychologist, I'm probably going to go a little toward the psychology side, but I think the most important thing that happened in the last 100 or 150 years in psychology was the recognition that there is such a thing as the unconscious, that the thoughts we have are not all of our being, and that there are forces in the universe that are acting upon us that we don't control. And that gets back to the idea of the Tao and flowing with the universe and things like that. So as I constantly come back to in these podcasts, the idea of balance, the idea of finding the balance between our conscious self and our unconscious self. And that is the greater self which exists in that balance. But that balance is true of everything because we interact with the universe symbolically. So we have to see that when we have a thought about something, we need to look at the opposite of that thing and strive to find the balance between them. Because if we go too far in any one direction, then we become a worshiper of idols, to put it in a different symbolic format. We have to see that there's always going to be an alternative to anything we strive toward. So I think that the idea of the Axis Mundi is existing in that place of balance. And that's what we really need to strive for.
And if we look at, Jung called the Axis Mundi a tree. And I think the Norris version, what Bob, what you're talking about is we've connected now that the underworld is real, and it's called the unconscious within our own system. See, this place that we're talking about here, this junction, it connects the underworld with the middle world, with China, and I'm saying that not as a country, but as a middle kingdom, and the heavens. And it seems to me we've had some good rendition of the heavens, but we've been really lacking when it comes to understanding this underworld place. And I think that's part of what Tolkien, he's really showing us these kind of unconscious struggles that are happening underneath us. And of course, that was in a Norse mythic way. Land of dwarves and fairies and elves and all kinds of stuff. But we have our own, full of demons and fiendish thingies, as well as really wonderful forces that are trying to drive us up. In other words, if you look at a tree, what are the roots there for? To receive nourishment in order to create a tree that can reach to the heavens. So this junction place to me, we're making this up, and it seems to me Axis Mundi is a very powerful concept to help us understand our own process of orienting ourselves in this mystery and not trying to explain the mystery away, or which is to me what idol worship is and dogma, but living more fully.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marianne.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I think, didn't Einstein say at one point that the deepest thing that we can feel is the mystery? And I think that's something that, you brought up Tolkien and my mind just, of course, went to Smog or, the precious, and that really shows the destructive nature that these forces can have on us if we get out of balance. And also the opposite side of that, where you get the grandiosity and you exalt yourself. And so I think I love what you said, Bob, about that balance, finding that place of where can we operate that is healthy.
Yeah. Well, and again, going back to Tolkien, you have the ultimate power in the ring, but you have to balance that with the sacrifice to give up that power in order to find your true nature. And that, I think, is what, there's nothing more powerful, if you will, than someone who thinks they know it all. But when they're willing to give up that knowing it all, they really begin to find out what is true and what is really the nature of things around them.
And that's part of the journey, is that semi-permeability and the ability to do that. If you look at Axis Mundi in all these cultures, by the way, my parents honeymooned on Mount Fuji, so I kind of have a special Axis Mundi vibe from that one. All these people created it so they had a place to gather around. Mecca's a great example because it's literal, and you can see it happening. And today, You see, when Bob talks about balance in this context, I see how do we live as community, okay? And it's the whole point of my own personal finding the path to my center is not for me, it's for the community. As a matter of fact, when I find the community and the authentic me, I might have to sacrifice and give up some of my phobias. I might have to forego. What did Michael Moore say? I don't care how, in 2016, I don't care how much you hate Hillary, when it comes to it, go and vote for her anyway. You know, there's a point where you have to just go for it. But living as community, and think about the word community. Com, share, unity. We're sharing this oneness of being a people together. The whole point of Axis Mundi, again, that's why it's not a selfish notion. It's only a selfish notion as if, like you all said about in the Tolkien, where you become so full of yourself or you become so obsessed with something that you lose sight of your connecting place to what is real and true for everyone.
But then again, there's also the balance between the individual and the community.
Right, and that's
if you give up your individuality to just be a pawn of the community, then you're out of balance again. Just as if you only think of yourself and don't think of the community, you're out of balance. So again, it's this constant striving for that middle way, the middle kingdom.
And you know, it's also an example of humility. That if it's all about you and your comfort and your convenience and making sure that everything's working for you, but you don't get out. And I mean, for me, I got a political sign on my front yard, and we give to this woman every month, hoping that she gets a city council seat. So how do we participate? If we're not participating in the community, and I mean in some way that's real and palpable and is reflected in your schedule and in your pocketbook, then I think all Axis Mundi talk and balance is just more imbalance. And I think that that's the point that we've missed. We don't know how to think as we the people anymore. I have very good friends who are very well off, and they couldn't vote for Trump, but they couldn't vote for Hillary either. And I went, what the hell? Do you know what the hell? And thank God they live in Washington State. My point is, the balance means participation. And I think what we have done in Western civilization, especially since phones and pods and, people live in their little bubbles and they don't get out. They create all these reasons for not getting out. And that's the semi-permeable and balance piece to me that is so important. And I don't, I look for ways to participate because I don't have a lot of energy, nor do I have a lot of money. So that balance is really important, and having a center to dance around that I know is not just my center, but other people's. And that's the point of Axis Mundi. The myth that has to emerge is that we are each the center of the universe and have a responsibility to participate in our, with all our gifts and everything else. And that's a struggle for me as an old guy.
Well, I think that that's a perfect point, that there is this place between ourself and the community. And I think that these guideposts that you laid out, the idea of the authenticity, when we have to come to ourselves and find out who we are first, and then we can figure out how do we engage in the community. And each one of us are going to have a different role. We're going to do it in a different way. When we can find what our part is, what our place is, and then we take that into the community, it's going to be healthy for, like you said, all of us. It's going to benefit not just ourselves, because I don't think self-sacrifice is the way. And I think you were talking about that, Bob, too. If you go one way, too much towards that way, then you become a martyr. And if you go too much the other way, then you lose. So finding out who we are as a person, and then bringing that Axis Mundi, that place of the self. And I think you started out this podcast talking about the self as the Axis Mundi. So if the self is that place between us and the community that we live in, then that authenticity that we can bring into the world is going to positively affect everything. Because whether or not you believe in God, you can believe that we are created with a power. And there is a power struggle, too, that goes on. Yeah. And so where does that power lie? Within us and within the community.
And you laid out the first layer of that power struggle, and that's authenticity itself. Because let's face it, that's a best guess, too. None of us can really say who we really are without, at some point, cutting ourselves off from the mystery. I'm a doctor. Well, if you just stop there, then you're stuck in your role. I'm a mother. Well, you can go to all these. So I think authenticity is the first layer of this ongoing process of, and I bring back, Bob's balance, where we're trying to balance the true self that I have with all my gifts and stuff with the world. And I want to also say that I don't think we're ever separate from the community. I think the community built itself in us, and that's part of the acknowledgement. So when I think of the community and me, and there is a gap between the two, but the fact is, it's not really a gap. It's because whatever the community is, it got built in me, and I'm trying to reconcile that. And that's why I'm reading the book on Robert E. Lee, because he was a hero of mine. I find out what he did to the captured black Union forces and stuff. He was a brutal contradiction of himself. And, writing that, getting over my own stuff, that's so important in my finding my center, is cleaning up that. People say, well, it's the past, you let it go. And I go, screw that. No, it's still living in me. I got to do something with it. and Bob, it gets back to the unconscious. I'm trying to deal with all this unconscious flux. Go ahead, Marianne. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say the question for me that comes up as you're talking about that is, can we ever see ourselves independent of the stories we have told and the stories we've been told? Are we a spirit living in a material world? Are we a spirit operating in the world as a doctor? Are we, and it gets back to that same idea of what is our true identity? And I think you're right. We bring lots of stories into our lives that shape this ego self.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And I think Marianne, you put your finger on something really important. We are an extension of those stories. We are an iteration of those stories. But, as we've talked about in this podcast, these stories are kind of universal, and they keep repeating themselves in new iterations. Go ahead, Bob.
I was going to say, the thing that many people fail to realize is that we're a process. We don't find balance and that's the end of it. We're constantly going in and out of it. We're constantly in different roles: a father, a husband, a doctor, a seeker. These roles change all the time. And every time we encounter someone else or a new idea, whether it's from a book or a movie or whatever, we're almost forced to reevaluate where we stand in this overall balance of things. And we're never going to be static, because life is not static. Life is a process, and we are part of that process. So as we strive to find authenticity, as we strive to differentiate between the good ideas and the not so good ideas, and exercise that semi-permeability of ourselves, we're constantly changing and finding new balance.
I think that's right. And
And
you know,
so,
as you were talking, the metaphor that kept popping in my mind is the new Axis Mundi is a ship at sea. You know, we're always trying to reorient ourselves to the star in the heavens, and yet we better damn well pay attention to what's happening below us, because it can sink us in a minute. We can go from a storm to the calm. You know, it's to me, it was a great connection in my head that the Axis Mundi is the ship at sea, and you are it. And we can't disconnect ourselves from the sea and live. We can't disconnect ourselves from the roots in the ground as a tree and still expect to live, much less give fruit, which is the fruit of the heavens, right? If you think of this metaphor and you keep pushing it, it's a wonderful thing. And down there in Florida, boy, you got lots of fruits from heaven, from avocado to oranges.
I don't know if they're all from heaven.
I know, but you know what I mean. They're nutritious.
I do.
They offer life-giving self to it, you know. I always say, I'm trying to teach my grandson that the reason we say grace at meal, and he always leads it, is because this is where death gives to life. Everything we eat was alive in some way, and it wants to live, but it gave itself up so we could. And that makes it holy and sacred. And I think that's also a piece of the Axis Mundi, is to realize that junction where nourishment happens, where there is sacrifice and giveaway, and that we are each part of that too. And I'll be honest, I lived my life as a follower of Jesus, which is very inconsistent with the Christian church. And it was full of sacrifice. It's. I don't think you can do a balanced thing without sacrifice, just because sacrifice is giving up part of oneself for something greater than oneself. And I think that all of us have to participate in that place. I used to go to AA and NA meetings for my clients, because it was before electronic surveillance, and I was working for the courts, and I had to make sure they were going to their meetings. And I went and got their book, man. I read the whole thing, and I go, this is really cool. And then I found out Carl Jung had something to do with that, and now I go, this is more cool than what I thought. So anyway, that's my babble of the moment.
Well, so a side note there, I just found out that psilocybin also had something to do with that the person that started AA actually used psilocybin, and that was kind of his opening up. So,
Well, you know, speaking of experiences, this one's about to end because we're coming to the end of our time. Bob, final comments on Axis Mundi and the guideposts for access?
Well, I love the idea of the tree as a symbol. I'll just throw one more thing into that mix of symbology. Not only do the roots provide nourishment, but they also provide support. So when we're looking to the unconscious, we got to realize, and this is faith on my part, the universe is striving through the unconscious to support us in whatever it is we're striving for in our conscious lives. I personally have faith that the unconscious, and by that I mean the universe, is there to support us.
Amen. Amen. Marianne, final comments?
I like that. I think I like the ship, because I think of in terms of anchors, and I think of those guideposts as those are like little anchors that can pull us back to certain ways of being. But for me, I think my mind goes to, is there something that is unchanging that we are all seeking? We're seeking that truth with the capital T. We're seeking that unconditional love that is always there and unchanging. Does that exist? And how do we go about finding that? Because we are learning and growing and changing and living, we are going to be on this sea. We're going to be continually changing and hopefully growing. And hopefully there is something that we are trying to achieve that. I think there's a glimmer that I can see at moments, and that keeps me going, keeps me striving.
Amen. And to be honest, I think the two images of tree and ship are good ones. They give us different ways to think about this concept of Axis Mundi. But one thing that I am very clear of is we are in the middle of a huge sea change. What that is and how it is, I think there's going to be a lot more suffering than not. So we have to find a way in those moments of retreat to get to our growing edge. What is that growing edge? You know, Bob brings up great stuff with the unconscious and balance. There's a place where the organism has to maintain itself. It has to create a continuity of being. Alzheimer's is where the continuity of being is actually screwed up. Think about how we get to our growing edge, and these guideposts are really good ways to do it. And these guideposts, you can't dogmatize them. You know, giving up perfectionism. Come on, man. We all want it to be really nice. We all want it to work beautifully. But life is messy. And so is our growing edge. It's not a comfortable place. So we hope you'll join us in that uncomfortable place, but also a place of our own bliss, where we reach for tomorrow and tomorrow reaches for us. My friends, may the bliss of God be all over you. And for those of you who don't believe in God, may you be one and know that you are.